There are love stories that capture the world's imagination, not because they are perfect, but because they feel real. For nearly 2 decades, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman were that kind of story. A Grammy-winning country star from Australia who conquered Nashville, an Oscar-winning actress from Sydney who conquered Hollywood. Together, they seem to have conquered something even harder: lasting love under the relentless spotlight of global fame. Fans followed them on red carpets, celebrated their anniversaries, and held them up as proof that stardom and genuine partnership could coexist. But in the autumn of 2025, that story came to a stunning end. And in its aftermath, Keith Urban began telling the truth, a truth that was more complicated, more painful, and more human than anyone had fully understood. When Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman first crossed paths in January 2005 at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, neither was looking for the kind of love that would define them. Nicole had recently emerged from her high-profile divorce from Tom Cruise and was navigating both professional reinvention and personal healing. Keith, already a rising force in country music, carried a quiet intensity beneath his easy charm. By all accounts, their first conversation lasted hours. Something clicked that night that neither of them could easily explain. Within months, they were a couple. By June 2006, they were married at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on the grounds of St. Patrick's Estate in Manly, Sydney, a ceremony that felt like a fairy tale come to life. Nicole wore a Balenciaga gown. Keith performed for the guests, as he so often would throughout their years together. Friends and family gathered in Australia to witness a union that carried enormous hope. What no one outside the chapel's walls fully knew was that hope would be tested almost immediately. In 2024, Keith Urban stood on stage at the AFI Life Achievement Award ceremony honoring Nicole Kidman and made a confession that the entertainment world received as a romantic gesture. He spoke openly about the earliest months of their marriage, admitting that just 4 months after their wedding, his addictions, which he had done very little to address, had blown their marriage to smithereens. He described how Nicole had pushed through every negative voice, including, he acknowledged, perhaps some of her own, and chose love. He called her capacity to love unlike anything he had ever witnessed. At the time, audiences were moved. It seemed like the kind of raw, honest tribute only a deeply secure couple could share publicly. It read as a testament to survival, proof that love could weather even the darkest storms. But when news broke in late September 2025 that Nicole Kidman had filed for divorce after nearly 20 years of marriage, those same words took on an entirely different weight. What had once sounded like a love letter now sounded like an unfinished reckoning. The confession had not been the closing chapter of a difficult story. It had been a preview of one that was still being written. Sources close to the couple confirmed what court documents and careful observers had been piecing together for months. The separation had been a long time coming. Reports indicated that by early summer 2025, Keith and Nicole had already begun living apart, with Urban having quietly established a separate residence in Nashville, while Kidman remained the anchor of their family home. There were no dramatic public confrontations, no explosive tabloid leaks, just a slow and painful drift that played out largely out of sight. What made the story particularly poignant was a picture that emerged in Nicole's position throughout that period. According to sources, she had been actively working to preserve a marriage even as late as June 2025, privately managing the emotional weight of a relationship that was increasingly being lived in parallel rather than together. She reportedly hid what was happening in their personal lives, hoping the situation could be salvaged. Friends described her as stunned and heartbroken when it became clear that the marriage could not be saved, and that Urban had already mentally moved on. Keith, for his part, was dealing with a different kind of internal crisis, the isolation and exhaustion of life on the road. His upcoming reality show, The Road, filmed before the public announcement of their separation, captured him admitting he often felt completely lonely and miserable while touring. He described waking up on a tour bus at 3:30 in the morning, sick, in the middle of nowhere, facing another performance, and questioning why he was doing it at all. These were not the words of a man at peace with his life. They were the words of someone who had allowed the machinery of his career to crowd out the intimacy of his marriage. Sources told outlets that Urban had begun to recognize, perhaps too late, that both he and Nicole had allowed their careers to dominate their lives in ways that slowly hollowed out their relationship. the realization did not come in time to change the outcome. On September 30th, 2025, Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee, citing irreconcilable differences. When the court filings became public, the details were both clinical and revealing. The marital dissolution agreement, signed by both parties, Urban on August 29, 2025, and Kidman on September 6, made clear that much of the work of separating had been done quietly in the weeks before the filing became official. Legal experts who reviewed the documents described the settlement as unusually clean and well-organized, a testament to the fact that the couple had spent considerable time preparing for the end before announcing it to the world. The custody arrangement placed Nicole as the primary residential parent of their two daughters, Sunday Rose, then 17, and Faith Margaret, then 14. Under the plan, Kidman would have the girls for 306 days of the year, while Urban would see them for 59 days, primarily every other weekend. Holidays were divided carefully: Father's Day with Keith, Mother's Day with Nicole, and Christmas on a rotating basis, with the girls always returning to Kidman on Boxing Day. On the financial side, the separation was described by legal professionals as almost surgical in its precision. Neither party would pay spousal support or alimony to the other. Urban had already prepaid his child support obligations by covering school and child care costs in advance. All properties, trusts, and business assets would remain separate, strongly suggesting the existence of a prenuptial agreement. Court filings listed both parties as reporting monthly incomes in excess of $100,000, though Kidman's actual earnings, reportedly over $31 million in 2024 alone, dwarfed that figure considerably. One clause from the agreement stood out in particular. The marital dissolution agreement explicitly stated that neither parent would speak negatively about the other or about members of the other's family. It was a provision designed to protect Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret from the fallout of very public dissolution, a final act of unified parenting from two people who could no longer sustain their partnership. Reports also surfaced about a prenuptial clause, referred to in some circles as sobriety clause, that had reportedly guaranteed Urban a significant financial payout. Some reports cited figures as high as $17 million, contingent on his remaining sober throughout the marriage. For those who knew how much Nicole had poured into supporting Keith through his battles with addiction, the existence of such a clause added a layer of complexity and, for some close to Kidman, a layer of bitterness to an already painful chapter. Almost as soon as news of the separation became public, speculation began swirling about whether there was someone else involved. Attention quickly focused on Maggie Ball, a young guitarist who had been touring with Urban as part of his High and Alive World Tour. Fans in tabloids dissected concert footage, pointed to moment of perceived chemistry on stage, and amplified comments from various corners of social media. A video circulated showing Urban being photographed stepping off a private jet without his wedding ring. The rumors spread fast. Neither Keith Urban nor Maggie Ball publicly addressed the speculation. Nicole Kidman said nothing about it publicly at all. The absence of denial in the court of public opinion was treated by many as a kind of confirmation. But confirmation never actually came. What the situation illustrated, more than anything else, was how hungry the public was for a clean narrative, for a villain, a reason, a moment that could explain the collapse of something they had believed in. The truth, as it almost always is in real marriages, was almost certainly messier and less dramatic. Two careers pulling in different directions. Years of distance accumulating. A man who admitted he was lonely and miserable on the road, and a woman who had spent years quietly absorbing the weight of a relationship that increasingly asked more of her than it gave. For months after the filing, Nicole Kidman said almost nothing publicly about the divorce. She appeared at events, attending Paris Fashion Week with her daughters just weeks after the separation became public, walking red carpets, participating in press for her films. She was visible but sealed. Sources describe her as heartbroken but determined, channeling her focus into her daughters and her work rather than into public statements. In November 2025, she offered her first indirect acknowledgement of the situation in a conversation published in Interview magazine. When asked by Ariana Grande how she was doing, she replied simply, "I'm hanging in there. It was not much, but it was something, a brief crack in the carefully maintained composure." Then, in March 2026, 2 months after the divorce was officially finalized by a Nashville judge on January 6, Nicole broke her silence more fully. In a cover story for Variety, she was asked whether 2026 would be her year. She paused a framing almost immediately. "Well, not last year," she told the publication. "I was quiet. I had other things going on. I was in my shell." When pressed on whether she was now ready to emerge, her answer carried the weight of someone who had done real internal work to arrive at a place of genuine forward motion. "I am, because I'm always going to be moving toward what's good," she said. "What I'm grateful for is my family and keeping them as is and moving forward." She then pointed firmly toward her creative future. A return to the world of practical magic with Sandra Bullock, new seasons of television work, and a slate of films that reflected a woman who had refused to be diminished by loss. "Everything else I don't discuss out of respect," she added, closing the door firmly on any deeper excavation of what had happened between her and Keith. "I'm staying in a place of, we are a family, and that's what we'll continue to be. My beautiful girls, my darlings, who are suddenly women." It was a statement of extraordinary dignity, and it told the world everything it needed to know about how Nicole Kidman intended to carry herself through whatever came next. Meanwhile, Keith Urban was left to face a more complicated public reckoning. His confession at the 2024 AFI tribute, once celebrated as a moment of romantic vulnerability, was now reframed in the public mind as an early, perhaps unconscious acknowledgement that the scars left by his addiction struggles had never fully healed, that the foundation of their marriage had been tested so severely in its first months that even Nicole's extraordinary capacity for love could not repair every crack. Sources who spoke to outlets in the weeks after the split described Urban as someone who was not doing well, who knew that the responsibility for much of what had gone wrong rested with his own choices, and who had begun to understand the full weight of what he had lost. He was reportedly aware that Kidman had given him every opportunity to course correct, and that he had chosen, in the end, to reach for what one source described as a sense of freedom, only to discover that freedom, at this cost, felt less like liberation and more like loss. His touring continued. Music remained his primary outlet for processing emotions he could not easily articulate in any other form. Those around him noted that he seemed to be reckoning not just with the end of his marriage, but with the question of who he wanted to be in the years ahead. As a father, as a performer, and as a man who had stood on stage in front of thousands of people and admitted, in his own words, that he had blown something beautiful to smithereens. The difference between 2024 and 2025 was that in 2024, that admission came with a resolution. Nicole had chosen love. They had survived. Now, there was no triumphant second act to offer. There was only the truth, sitting in the open air, without a redemptive ending attached. The story of Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman is not, in the end, a story about Hollywood failure or the inevitable corrosion of fame. It is a deeply human story about the cost of leaving the most important wounds unhealed, of allowing career and distance and the daily momentum of life to substitute for the harder work of genuine emotional intimacy. It is a story about a woman who gave everything she had to a partnership and emerged from its end with her dignity fully intact. And it is a story about a man who is still learning what it means to fully reckon with the consequences of his own choices. Their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, remain at the center of everything. The carefully constructed parenting plan, the clause that prevents either parent from speaking ill of the other, the prepaid obligations designed to smooth the path forward, all of it reflects a shared commitment to protecting their girls from the worst of what public dissolution can inflict on children. In that commitment, at least, Keith and Nicole remain partners in the most important work either of them will ever do. As for the rest, the years of love, the moments of genuine joy that no tabloid account can fully capture, the nights in Nashville and Sydney, and wherever else too very busy, very driven people manage to find each other. Those belong to them alone. What the world gets to see is the aftermath. Nicole Kidman, moving toward what is good, eyes fixed firmly on the future. Keith Urban, somewhere on the road, carrying away a confession that turned out to be truer and sadder than anyone understood when he first made it. Some stories do not have clean endings. They have honest ones. And sometimes honest is harder and more valuable than anything else.